Now in our 26th year, 26.59 to be exact, more than a quarter of a century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1383, with a release and air date of Saturday, August 30th, 2025. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone. Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the United States, and podcast on the internet since 1993, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1383 of This Week in Amateur Radio. Amateur radio enthusiasts explain why they are worried about SpaceMobile's satellite use of the amateur bands. The FCC batch filing system goes down and no date is set for reinstatement. A well-known European exporter and ham radio retailer halts shipments to the US due to tariffs and lack of shipping channels. The CEO of the ARRL, David Minster, is the current guest on the DX Mentor podcast. A disabled sailing vessel at sea is helped by the Maritime Mobile Network. Resilience through amateur radio is the theme of this year's National Preparedness Month. The ARRL Contest Advisory Committee is reviewing Canadian section multipliers. AMSAT files comments with the FCC over SpaceMobile's use of the 70cm amateur band. The FCC proposes to restructure the emergency alert system in the United States. ARRL Director and Vice Director election candidates are announced. The Best of Amateur Radio are honored with ARRL awards. Federal grants for new emergency alert systems will exclude public radio stations. And we will take a brief look back at Collins Radio. All these stories and a lot more are straight ahead on today's edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will tell us about using an SDR as measuring equipment. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, he takes us aboard the Wayback Machine to March 20th, 1923, when Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover convened his second National Radio Conference and where amateurs are assigned a band of wavelengths for the first time. This week is the concluding part 2 of a series entitled First Band, Top Band. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Saliers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now.
Reporting from our headquarters studio, just outside of Albany, New York, where fall is in the air and a few tree limbs are turning red, this is W2XBS.
And reporting from our news bureau in Sandwich, Illinois, where the forecast is looking great for the 137th annual Sandwich Fair, I'm Jordan Kurtz, Kilo Echo 9, Bravo, Papa Oscar.
And reporting this week from our news bureau in Cortlandville, New York, where my crystal ball tells me fall will be here soon, or maybe it's my thermometer telling me that, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our news bureau in Salem, Ohio, this is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
And reporting live from the warm and humid Space Coast in Florida, I am Ed Johnson, W2PH.
And reporting from our Trey, New York News Bureau, where it looks like we're going to get an early autumn this year, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo, Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our news bureau in Knoxville, Tennessee, freshly back from the Huntsville Ham Fest. It was great to see everybody down there. I'm Josh Marler, AA4WX.
And reporting from our news bureau in Hilton, New York, where it looks like the hot summer temperatures are making an early exit, this is George, Kilo Charlie 2, Oscar X-Ray Juliet.
And reporting from our ham radio outpost in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where the last major holiday of the summer is now underway, and the kids will be all back in school on Tuesday. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where we've been having a touch of autumn weather, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
Leading off our news again this week, AST SpaceMobile's attempt to justify its use of the amateur radio 70cm band for its satellites has done little to assuage concerns from the ham radio community. AST is again economical with the truth. An amateur radio operator in Germany named Mario Lorenz wrote to the FCC last week. During the last few weeks, Texas-based AST defended using the radio band, telling the FCC that any radio interference should be minimal. It would use the 430 to 440 MHz band for very limited, non-routine use, such as emergency operations when other frequency bands are unavailable. However, the amateur radio community says that AST is already using those bands. This week, AMSAT Deutschland sent a letter to the FCC that says amateur radio users have detected signals from AST's satellites over the radio bands. The claim is therefore either misrepresentation or deliberate falsehood, AMSAT Deutschland wrote. In particular, AST's Blue Walker 3 satellite was spotted using the radio band up until July 23rd, as the amateur radio community began campaigning against the spectrum use. Ironically, AMSAT Deutschland operates as a group devoted to the advancement of satellite communications, along with amateur radio satellites. In the letter, the group even noted, "We applauded AST SpaceMobile's ambitious goals. However, innovation must not come at the expense of internationally recognized and community-supported amateur radio services." AMSAT Deutschland also went on to say that the clash with AST has hit a nerve with the amateur radio community over concerns it could set a precedent if the FCC greenlights the company's use of the 430 to 440 MHz bands for satellite control. In addition, the group is worried that the FCC is effectively shifting the resulting interference risk to other countries. If similar authorizations are granted to other commercial operators, the 430 to 440 MHz band could gradually become unusable for amateur radio. What is framed as exceptional use today risks becoming the norm tomorrow, to the detriment of a long-standing and diverse community of amateur radio users, the group said. It also raises questions about AST's technical maturity, the group added. Other large-scale satellite operators, such as SpaceX, with over 6,000 Starlink satellites in orbit, appear to manage telemetry, tracking, and command functions without resorting to use of the amateur UHF band. AST didn't immediately respond to a request for comment, but the company submitted a third-party analysis to the FCC that claims to show the risk of interference to be extremely unlikely to amateur radio operations. However, Mario Lorenz, the amateur radio user who helped kick off the protest campaign, told the FCC this week that the third-party analysis was flawed. Yet again, AST tries to get away with handing in only half the homework it was supposed to do, Lorenz wrote. Despite its title, the study addresses only a single scenario of interference in the amateur radio satellite service, not amateur radio use on the ground. The Bulgarian Federation of Amateur Operators also told the FCC last month, even slight interference under these operating conditions can result in harmful interference as defined in FCC Regulations 47 CFR 2.1, disrupting communications, damaging experimental data integrity, and jeopardizing control of amateur satellites.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
As of Monday morning, August 25th, 2025, the FCC's electronic batch filing system, used by all VEC organizations to file exam sessions, individual applications, and club license applications, is not processing submissions. This outage means that applications for new and upgraded licenses, as well as individual and club filings, are not currently being processed or issued. ARRL VEC alerted FCC staff, who are working to resolve the problem. While the system briefly processed a small number of Monday submissions on Wednesday, it has since gone down again. Thousands of applications remain pending on the FCC side. ARRL VEC manager Maria Sama, AB1FM, reported that the FCC has not provided an estimate on when the system will be restored. Please check for updates on the FCC outage as more information becomes available.
European ham radio retailer Passion Radio suspends U.S. shipments following a 15% tariff increase. In a press release, the retailer said that because of the recent 15% tariff increase on products imported from the European Union, the suspension of several carrier service into the United States, and the growing complexity of the U.S. import system, our online shop, PassionRadio.com, must suspend all shipments to the United States until further notice. In particular, La Poste, the French national postal operator, suspended partial shipments to the United States as of August 25, 2025, removing one of the main EU to U.S. postal channels. At the same time, UPS announced that starting September 8, 2025, an additional international processing fee will apply to all import shipments, regardless of origin. There has also been some misunderstanding regarding customs procedures. When parcels arrive in the United States, the buyer must settle not only the 15% customs duty, but also the service fee charged by the carrier for filing customs declarations and advancing duties to U.S. Customs. These charges are billed locally at delivery and remain outside the seller's control. Import duties and tariffs are always the responsibility of the buyer, not the seller. Unfortunately, with constant changes in tariffs, rates, and carrier processes, we cannot guarantee fair, efficient, and transparent shipping conditions, said David, F1JXQ, director of Passion Radio. He goes on to say, "Our goal is to resume shipments to the U.S. as soon as a reliable and cost-effective solution is available for everyone." Meanwhile, our collaboration with 5 U.S.-based suppliers continues without disruption, as the European Union has not imposed any retaliatory tariffs or reciprocal 15% import duties on products arriving from the United States. Updates will be communicated through our website and our social channels. To all our U.S. friends on the bands, we thank you for your understanding and support, and we look forward to resuming deliveries as soon as possible. Passion Radio is a French-based retailer specializing in amateur radio, SDR, and RF communication equipment for enthusiasts and professionals. Established in 2014, the company has grown to become the ham radio leader shop in France, providing one-stop-shop RF solutions with over 2,100 references from more than 55 brands.
ARRL CEO David Minster, NA2AA, is the guest on the DX Mentor YouTube channel this week. The host of the popular show, This Week in Amateur Radio's own Bill Salyers, AJ8B, and Joe Pater, W8GEX, spoke with the minister at length about the many topics of interest. They touched on the recent introduction of the DXCC Trident plaque, which recognizes the achievements of amateur radio operators who have confirmed two-way radio contacts with 100 or more DXCC awards countries on 3 nodes. Minister also talked about the newly announced 10-band DXCC award. The importance of radio clubs and 2026 being designated as the ARRL year of the club are also the topics of discussion. Minster also answered questions about the decisions made at the recent second meeting of the ARRL Board of Directors. The trio talked about this year's Huntsville Hamfest, which held its annual convention in Alabama earlier this month. Huntsville Hamfest will host the ARRL National Convention next year, August 22 and 23, in 2026. Other topics of interest included the impact of social media on amateur radio and ARRL leadership and governance. Minster also talked about the ARRL DX Advisory Committee. You can watch the 2-hour interview on YouTube or listen to the DX Mentor podcast on your favorite platform.
ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, has announced that the candidates for the 2025 ARRL division elections are now official. ARRL members will choose between 4 candidates for director in the Southeastern Division, 2 candidates for director in the Pacific and Southwestern Divisions, and 2 candidates for vice director in the Southwestern Division. The directors in the Rocky Mountain and West Gulf Divisions are unopposed, as are the vice directors in the Pacific, Rocky Mountain, Southeastern, and West Gulf Divisions. Declared elected without opposition in the Rocky Mountain Division, Director Jeff Ryan, K0RM, who has held the position since 2018, and Mel Perkins, NM7P, who ran uncontested for the position of Vice Director. In the West Gulf Division, Director John Robert Stratton, N5AUS, and Vice Director Lee Cooper, W5LHC, both have held these positions since 2019. In the Pacific Division, Vice Director Carol Malazzo, KP4MD, who was appointed to the position in July 2025. In the Southeastern Division, Vice Director Andrew Maluzzi, KK4LWR, who has held the position since 2024. The contested seats are as follows. In the Pacific Division, Director John Litz, NZ6Q, will face challenger Bob Valayo, W6RGG, who has previously served as a vice director, director, and second vice president. In the Southeastern Division, Director Mickey Baker, N4MB, will face challengers Jim Kavuk, K8JK, a former Michigan section manager, Scott Roberts, KK4ECR, who is the Northern Florida section manager, and Tom Schaefer, NY4I. In the Southwestern Division, Director Richard Norton, N6AA, will face challenger Rick Paquette, W7RAP, who is the Arizona section manager. John Kitchens, NS6X, the Santa Barbara section manager, will face challenger David Ginsberg, N3BKV, for the position of vice director. Balloting for contested seats will take place this fall. Votes will be counted and successful candidates announced in November. Candidates declared elected will assume their roles for terms beginning January 1st, 2026. ARRL is governed by its board of directors. Elections are held for 5 of the 15 ARRL divisions each year, for terms of 3 years.
Some of the nation's public radio stations have learned that they will not be involved in the government's new proposed upgrade to the emergency alert system. An updated emergency alert system to be rolled out in the United States will exclude funding for it at public radio stations. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which faces closure at the end of the next month after its own defunding, has told member stations that applied to its warning system grant program that there is no money for them. In an August 18th email, the corporation CEO Kathy Merritt wrote, "The Corporation for Public Broadcasting is deeply disappointed that critical equipment intended to protect the American public in times of emergencies will go unpurchased." She said, however, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting had no choice. The nation's emergency alert system, which delivers public safety traffic when severe weather or other threats are imminent, has been under review by the Federal Communications Commission.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Sailing off the coast of San Francisco on August 3rd, the captain and crew of 4 aboard the vessel Windchaser found that their boat had become dead in the water, adrift after its propeller got entangled with a rope. Without cell service available, the captain, Dennis Dickerson, KI6KQJ, reached out to the Maritime Mobile Service Network on 20 meters, contacting Net Control John McGowan, K2JBX. After hearing that all aboard were safe, John said he would check in with Dennis the next day because the crew hoped to paddle ashore for repairs then. That scheduled check-in proved significant. Park rangers at the hoped-for landing site, Point Reyes Marine Reserve, were initially hesitant to grant access to the boat because the reserve is so environmentally sensitive. According to net manager Jeff Savasta, KB4JKL, John was able to help secure special permission for the boat to land for repairs. But by the time that critical permission was granted, propagation had changed. The boat could not be reached immediately. However, when conditions changed, Jeff on the next shift was able to deliver the good news, and the boat was soon on its way.
ARRL honors the work of amateur radio operators who grow the hobby by advancing technology used within and the operating culture of amateur radio service. With more details on these awards, we go to League headquarters, where John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this special report.
At the second meeting of the ARRL Board of Directors, hams and journalists who have covered amateur radio were honored with their awards. The 2025 ARRL Technical Innovation Award went to Matthew Wishick, NB0X, for his work on development of opulent voice minimum shift keying transceiver implementation and modern module architecture. The 2025 Technical Service Award was issued to Bill Miera, N2CQR, and Dean Suleilas, KK4DAS, who have developed and facilitated the Solder Smoke Education Project, which has enabled high school students and many amateur radio operators to construct a working HF receiver. The ARRL Herb S. Breyer Instructor of the Year Award was awarded to Dennis Simon, KB7UTV. The ARRL Hiram Percy Maxim Memorial Award went to Alexa Snethan, KM6LGG. She is also the recipient of the 2025 ARRL Foundation Goldfarb Memorial Scholarship. The Philip J. McGann Silver Antenna Awardee is Micah Martin, KN6VUT of California. He has been recognized by his peers for his exemplary service in the Tehachapi Amateur Radio Association as the club's public information officer, for leading to a 59% increase in club membership and nearly tripling the number of licensed applicants in the area. And the 2025 Bill Leonard Professional Media Award for print reporting was given to McKenna Kelly and Del Cameron of Wired for their article, Through Hurricanes Helen and Milton, Amateur Radio Triumphs When All Else Fails. The award for video reporting was bestowed on NBC Today correspondent Harry Smith for his report, Meet the Students Using Radio Waves to Contact the ISS. More information about ARRL awards, along with nomination instructions, can be found on the ARRL website. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The RRL Technical Service Award is given annually to individuals who are licensed radio amateurs whose service to the amateur community and the society at large is of the most exemplary nature within the framework of amateur radio technical activities. The ARRL Herb S. Breyer Award, Instructor of the Year, recognizes the best in amateur radio instruction and recruitment in the memory of Herb S. Breyer, W9AD, a silent key, a longtime CQ novice editor, who represented the spirit of effective caring amateur radio instruction. The ARRL Hiram Percy Maxim Memorial Award is given annually to a licensed radio amateur under the age of 21, whose accomplishments and contributions to both the community of amateur radio and the local community are of the most exemplary nature. The Philip K. McGann Silver Antenna Award is given to a licensed radio amateur for volunteer public relations efforts on behalf of amateur radio, who best exemplifies the public relations efforts of Philip J. McGann, WA2MBQ, also silent key. The Bill Leonard Professional Media Award pays tribute to the late CBS News president Bill Leonard, W2SKE, by recognizing professional journalists whose outstanding coverage highlights the enjoyment, importance, and public service value of the amateur radio service.
September is National Preparedness Month, which is a good time to look at your personal, family, and community resilience levels. With more details on the National Preparedness Month, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this special report from League headquarters.
2025, the National Preparedness Month theme is Preparedness Starts at Home. Amateur radio is a valuable resource of communication and community service before and during times of crisis, and can be a significant factor in your home's level of preparedness. Now is the time to make sure everything is in order, said ARRL Director of Emergency Management Josh Johnston, KE5MHV. For hams, it means taking the time to check their equipment from the ground to the antenna so that it is ready. Many hams already practiced in daily, weekly, and monthly nets that help them hone their communication skills, but if you're not already active on one, this could be a good opportunity to get into it, said Johnston. To extend your personal preparedness into helping provide community resilience, Johnston invites operators to become active in their local ARRL Amateur Radio Emergency Service ARES activities. ARES has been leveraging the utility value of the amateur radio service for 90 years, he said. We saw that last year during Hurricane Helene, how vital of a lifeline ham radio operators were for the affected areas. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is predicting an above-normal 2025 Atlantic hurricane season. Hurricane Watch Net manager Bobby Graves, KB5HAV, says that should motivate hams but not scare them. Never let your guard down, said Graves. Don't live your life in fear, just be aware. Graves added that his net operators are spread across the Western Hemisphere, but they still have training sessions via radio nets and Zoom meetings.
In response to the radio amateurs of Canada's recent edition of a new Yukon section, the ARRL Contest Advisory Committee is reviewing Canadian section multipliers for ARRL contests that use sections as multipliers. While this review is ongoing, the 2024 multiplier list will be used for the remainder of 2025. Stations located in Yukon should continue to send TER territories for the 2025 November sweepstakes, CW, SSB, and ARRL 160-meter contests. In sweepstakes, stations in the United States and Canada, including territories and possessions, exchange information with as many other U.S. and Canadian stations as possible on the 160, 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10-meter bands. The 2025 ARRL November sweepstakes will be active the first full weekend of the month, November 1st through the 3rd for CW, and the third full weekend, November 15th through the 17th for phone. For contest information, contact contests@ARRL.org.
The United States mobile broadband provider that hopes to use amateur radio frequencies to support its planned satellite-based network has rolled back the date for the launch of its prototype satellite. This is the second delay by AST SpaceMobile, which had originally hoped to launch the satellite known as FM1 in August and first postponed it to October or November. India's space agency, ISRO, confirmed the delay in a press conference with local Indian media, adding that FM1 would likely not launch until the first quarter of 2026. FM1, which has a phased array antenna, is designed to function as a cell tower from space. The announcement comes barely a week after the company said it expects to launch between 45 and 60 satellites by next year. No reason was given for the postponement, which was reported on the PC Magazine website. AST SpaceMobile is building its network in partnership with Verizon and AT&T, and is considered a rival to Starlink services, which are partnered with T-Mobile. Texas-based AST SpaceMobile has asked the FCC to authorize its network's use of amateur radio frequencies between 430 and 440 MHz, a request that has drawn challenges from the amateur radio community. In July, the FCC assigned FM1 the call sign WP2XRX, which expires on July 1, 2027. Its license authorizes experimental operation for mobile satellite services on 37.5 to 42 GHz and 2.235 GHz and 2.245 GHz.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX as part of Ham Radio's oldest ham radio magazine on the air, This Week in Amateur Radio. I'm Bill, AJ8B. As of this Saturday, there will be 116 days left until Christmas. Time is flying, so we better get started. The DX word for the week or phrase is clublog.org. Clublog is a free web-based platform for amateur radio operators to manage, analyze, and share their logging data. It serves as a powerful toolkit for DXers, offering a wide range of features that enhance the ham radio experience. Key features and functions include log upload and analysis. Users can upload their logs in ADIF format. Clublog then analyzes these logs to identify DXCC entities worked and confirmed, highlight missing entities, and detect possible errors in DXCC allocations. League tables and challenges. Clublog generates dynamic league tables that compare users' achievements across bands, modes, and timeframes. These can be filtered by region, club, or specific criteria, making it ideal for friendly competition. DX prediction tools. Based on historical QSO data, Clublog can predict the best bands and times to work specific DX stations. It also provides great circle maps to visualize propagation paths. Most wanted lists. The platform compiles lists of the most sought-after DXCC entities, helping operators target rare contacts. Online QSL Request System, or OQRS. Expeditions and operators can use Clublog's OQRS feature to streamline QSL card requests, reducing manual effort and improving efficiency. And finally, integration with LOTW. Users can import QSL confirmations from Logbook of the World, or LOTW, keeping their records synchronized. The purpose of Clublog is that it's not a contesting tool or an award validator, but rather a community-driven resource that enhances logging accuracy, encourages DXing, and fosters collaboration among amateur radio enthusiasts. It's widely appreciated for its clean interface, flexibility, and the depth of insights that it can provide. Clublog is a moderately popular platform within the amateur radio community, and its usage statistics reflect its significance. As of the latest data available, Clublog has around 45,000 registered users from across the globe. It stores 1.25 billion QSOs, indicating widespread adoption and consistent use by HFDXers. The site receives approximately 276,000 monthly visitors, suggesting steady engagement from the ham radio community. Clublog is widely used by DXpeditions and individual operators alike, and its tools are considered essential by many for tracking DXCC entities, managing logs, and participating in league tables. Contact me at thedxmentor@gmail.com if you need more details or information. Each week, I try to focus on those entities that will be available in the next 7 days. There's so much data to sift through that I thought a focus on the next week might be helpful. Here's what you should find QRV when you tune the vans. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com and I'll fix you up. Cesar, VE3LYC, Philippe, XQ7IR, and Johan, PA3EXX, mounted an IOTA expedition as 3 Golf 1 Papa this past week, but had to end it 2 days early due to treacherous conditions. They concluded a recent email by writing, "This project was without question a very difficult one, which included a number of risks that we were able to manage, a true adventure in every sense of the word. We are sincerely grateful to all of those who assisted us in the landing and extraction, as well as those who helped us along the way." End quote. We commend them on their perseverance and wish them safe passage home. And if you weren't familiar with this at all, they were only able to get in to within, say, 30 or 40 meters and actually had to swim into these rocks and float the equipment in there. So they knew they were up for a challenge, but it's a great group. And frankly, they made quite a few QSOs, so it certainly was a success. The pallet of equipment for the Echo 51 Mike Whiskey Alpha DXpedition has made it to its final destination in the Northern Cook Islands. They plan to be QRV October 9th to the 20th, 2025. Current plans are for 160 through 10 meter operations. The band plan will be updated shortly. For those who plan to work them, they offer an opportunity to make a $10 or greater contribution towards our shipping costs home. Contributions received prior to September 25th will receive quick, unlimited automatic LOTW uploads and a beautiful QSL card when we return. That's a good deal. We expect to have internet connectivity via Starlink, allowing us to live stream on Clublog. Further information will be available in the coming days. Thank you to DX Engineering for sending us the coax and for its August 18th article promoting the E51 MWA DXpedition and our younger operator, Violetta Latham, KN2 Papa. Also, thank you to Step IR for linking us up with a logistics company. And thanks to all of you who are individual supporters. Bernhard, Delta Lima 2 Golf Alpha Charlie, is scheduled to arrive in Hanaria, the capital of the Solomon Islands, on the afternoon of September 12th. Following his arrival and shopping in Hanaria, he will reside in Menakawa Village, which he will reach by ferry and truck around September 17th. Bernard anticipates commencing operations as H-44MS from approximately September 20th. He will be bringing a recently repaired 1.3K expert amplifier to H-44, while all other equipment is either in Hararia or at his operating location already. During his stay, he aims to make contact with at least one new DXCC entity, hopefully 3 Charlie, which is Equatorial Guinea. Bernhard will remain in the Solomon Islands until November 30th. And speaking of Equatorial Guinea, 3 Charlie and 3 Charlie 0 DXpeditioners YL2GM, who's Yoris, and AE5EL Yevgen are getting ready for their trips to Equatorial Guinea and Annobon expected in September. Yoris has been very busy packing the antennas. On Wednesday, August 27th, Yevgen will be in Latvia. On Friday, August 29th, which was yesterday, the two will fly from Riga to Paris and then on to Malobo. I'm excited about that one. That's not active very often, so if you get a chance, you should try to get them in the log. Janus SP9FIH, operating as VK2-SP9FIH from Lord Howe Island, encountered unexpected challenges at the outset of his activities. Although he planned to begin operations on August 27th, unforeseen circumstances at his location delayed the start until the following day. The only available site for antenna installation was adjacent to a substantial aging steel mast with steel guy wires and 2 large steel dishes, which interfered with the antennas, causing detuning and degraded SWR performance. Additionally, several nearby trees further complicated the setup process. Janus devoted the entire day to adjusting the antennas to accommodate these environmental constraints. He will be there till September 13th. And I know we've talked about all kinds of things these guys run into. It could be heat, could be cold, could be mosquitoes and bugs. It could be military unrest or guards. And here's a case where he got there and the only place he could set up really was not very optimal, so he had to make do. So these guys really put it out there when they go on these trips. OptDX reports that A35JK by operator JK1JXZ Masa is now on the air from Tonga. This town is the capital and the largest town on Tonga. So far, he's been found on 12, 15, and 17 meters FT8. There was one mention that he will be there until September 12th, and another that his length of stay is unknown. I've also heard a rumor that he may be on 20 meters as well. And QSL the A35JK to JK1JXZ. Starting August 30th, or today, depending on when you're listening to this, DJ5MN Bernhard will be QRV as SV5-DJ5MN and SV5-DJ5MN/portable from the Dodecanese Islands. He will be, quote, playing around on CW, sideband, and FT8 on 40 through 10 meters until September 8th. He'll also be on FM, sideband, and CW on the low-orbiting satellites. And you can QSL that via DJ5MN. The DX Mentor will drop a new show on both YouTube and podcast simultaneously this weekend. I cannot tell you who the guest is, but he was very interesting and provided a lot of information. Check it out on YouTube or on your favorite podcast app and let me know what you think. And if you're interested in DX podcast and YouTube channels, you should check out the DX Mentor Facebook page and subscribe to be kept up to date on all of the DX activities that we post. Please send me an email if you need any details on this topic or any other topic that we discussed. Until next week, this is Bill, AJB, saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups. Have a great DX week.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. The other day I stumbled on a random post by Gary, November 8 Delta Mike Tango, which caused me to view the world in a different way. The post outlined combining a Pluto SDR and an application called SAT-SAGAN to measure the frequency characteristics of a coupler. Aside from a detailed description, the post includes a couple of excellent photos showing the Pluto SDR connected to the coupler and the output piped back into the Pluto. Before I continue, a Pluto SDR is a software-defined radio, or SDR. Officially, it's called the ADALM Pluto Software-Defined Radio Active Learning Module. It's essentially a full duplex radio and computer in a box. It runs Linux and connects to the world via USB, and of course radio, unofficially between 70 MHz and 6 GHz. I've talked about this device before. When I say full duplex, I mean that it can transmit and receive at the same time. Gary's post triggered something unexpected in me. The notion that you could use two patch leads, one connected to the transmitter, the other connected to the receiver, joined together by a device that you might want to test. It immediately reminded me of another device that was given to me, a Nano VNA, a device that's specifically designed to measure things like impedance, frequency response, generate Smith charts, and all manner of other characteristics. Not only that, it also reminded me of another device, a Tiny SA, specifically designed to analyze spectrum and to generate signals. Both the Nano VNA and Tiny SA are lovely tools, but in looking at the post it suddenly occurred to me that their functionality, at least superficially, appears to mirror the Pluto SDR, in that you can create a signal and then measure that signal. Turns out that I'm not the first to make this observation. For example, the YouTube channel, From Concept to Circuit, goes through the process of describing precisely the concepts behind both a spectrum analyzer and a network analyzer, while showing the programming code in Python. The channel also provides that code in a GitHub repository which includes several other very interesting examples, like a beamforming transmitter as well as a beamforming receiver, also covered on YouTube. Another example is a tool I already mentioned, SAT-SAGAN, by Alberto, India Uniform 1 Kilo Victor Lima, which implements a wideband spectrum analyzer. Although it's Windows only, Alberto includes information on how to run it using Wine under Linux and Mac OS. As a bonus, SAT-SAGAN, in addition to the Pluto SDR, also supports RTL SDR dongles, HackRF, USRP, RSP1, AirSpy, and many others. If text is more your thing, Retrogram Pluto SDR shows a spectrogram in your terminal window. Check out the Romeo 4 Delta 10 November GitHub repository belonging to Rakesh, Victor Uniform 3 Romeo Golf Papa, who says that the Retrogram project is, quote, hacked from, unquote, the RX ASCII Art DFT example, which you can find on the Etis Research GitHub repository. One thing to consider is that the various GitHub repositories I've pointed at will give you access to the moving parts on how all this works. I will mention that my favorite tool in this space continues to be GNU Radio, but I understand that you might not want to roll your own tool from parts. That said, rolling your own is, in my experience, a great way to discover precisely what you don't know and to come away learning more, but then that's just me. Regardless of your chosen tool, I think the takeaway should be that when you try something new, even if it's only new to you, the idea of writing down what you discovered and sharing it is a fantastic way to grow our community. Remember, just because something is old hat to you doesn't mean that it is to the person you share it with. Besides, based on the current global birth rate, there's at least 1,000 babies born during the past 4 minutes, some of whom will become radio amateurs. So share. Said differently, if you come across a person who has never heard of the Diet Coke and Mentos thing, it's your job to immediately drag them to the nearest grocery store and introduce them. In case you're wondering, XKCD 1053. Now, I'm going to update the firmware on my Pluto SDR and have a play. I already know about the Mentos, but if you don't, you're in for a treat. What are you going to do next? I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
This fall, the National Amateur Radio Alliance, the NARA, will sponsor Club Week, a special event for clubs to make contact with one another on the air. Unlike a contest, Club Week does not involve earning points or submitting logs to NARA. Instead, it's a relaxed and engaging event where clubs can operate from a club shack, a member's home, a park, or any public location. Clubs are encouraged to organize additional activities to make the most of this opportunity. Participants should be prepared to send and respond to QSL cards, which provides additional opportunities to engage and teach new hams. Club Week will span 9 days. While a final date hasn't yet been finalized, clubs can register early for the event on the National Amateur Radio Alliance website. The National Amateur Radio Alliance serves as a central hub of resources for amateur radio operators. National association built for today's ham radio community, NARA focuses on 4 key areas: resources, engagement, outreach, and advocacy, ensuring that operators, clubs, and communities have the support they need to grow, connect, and lead in a changing world.
This Labor Day weekend, the Hurricane WatchNet celebrates its 60th anniversary of providing critical communication support to the National Hurricane Center and to communities impacted by hurricanes. John Ross, KD8IDJ, has the details.
As Hurricane Betsy was plummeting the Caribbean on Labor Day weekend 1965, the ham radio operators started hearing calls for information from operators in the Bahamas. Jerry Murphy, K8YUW, sprang into action. He began relaying surface data and storm conditions to help those in the path. That first net paved the way for what would become the Hurricane WatchNet. HWN has been active for 156 land-falling hurricanes, including 60 major hurricanes, Category 3 or stronger. Of those, 12 struck as Category 5 hurricanes. The net's longest continuous activation occurred during Hurricane Matthew in 2016, when operators remained on the air for 151 hours straight. Among the deadliest storms ever recorded by the net was Hurricane Mitch in 1998, which claimed more than 11,000 lives in Central America. HWN operates on 14.325 MHz and 7.268 MHz, often simultaneously, with net control stations strategically placed throughout the region to maximize coverage. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The Hurricane WatchNet continues to serve the public interest by helping save lives during hurricanes. We are proud to carry forward the vision of our founder, Jerry Murphy, who passed away earlier this year at the age of 88, said Hurricane WatchNet manager Bobby Graves, KB5HAV. For more information about the Hurricane WatchNet or to get involved as a volunteer, visit www.hwn.org.
Stealth Antennas for Ham Radio is full of antennas to get you on the air no matter where you live. Even radio amateurs who live with antenna restrictions or covenant limitations will find solutions in this new book. Learn how to install a multiband vertical that looks like a flagpole, or how to run an end-fed random wire along your roof, so the neighbors never notice. If you are looking for an invisible repeater connection, try the ham walking stick. If you want 5 bands but cannot put wires in trees or display anything even remotely antenna-like, try the compact Stealth Inverted L. Stealth Antennas for Ham Radio will also help hams who want to stay unnoticed by neighbors. There are ideas for small lots, covenant-restricted properties, and many other living situations. Steve Ford, WB8IMY, kicks off the collection with safe, effective, and ethical stealth operation. Stealth operating can be highly rewarding if you understand your limitations and work to alleviate them as much as possible, Ford says. Try out these 28 unobtrusive stealth antennas today. Look at the new books area on the League's website.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, your amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air, available as a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartMedia, and Spotify.
It is time once again for this week's AMSAT satellite shorts from all over. And this week we begin with news from NASA. NASA says the United States is racing to be the first nation to deploy a nuclear reactor on the lunar surface, following new orders from acting NASA Administrator Sean Duffy. His directive, issued July 31st, calls for fast-tracking lunar nuclear power to stay ahead of China and Russia, who have just announced joint plans to build a reactor by the mid-2030s. Duffy warned that if rivals succeed first, they could impose keep-out zones that would threaten U.S. access and undermine the Artemis program, which aims to return astronauts to the moon in 2027. The order requires NASA to appoint a program leader within 30 days and expands on previous work with the Department of Energy to develop fission surface power producing at least 40 kilowatts of power. Since long-term lunar operations are estimated to require at least 100 kilowatts of electric power, or about the consumption of 80 to 100 U.S. homes, nuclear power is seen as critical for sustaining life on the moon and enabling future Mars missions. In addition, Duffy issued a separate directive to speed up the commercial space station development as the International Space Station nears retirement by 2030. Next, SpaceX successfully launched the U.S. Space Force's X-37B spaceplane aboard a Falcon 9 rocket from Kennedy Space Center on August 21, 2025, marking the start of its 8th mission. The booster, making its 6th flight, landed at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station just over 8 minutes after liftoff. The Boeing-built X-37B, part of a 2-vehicle fleet, has previously flown missions lasting between 224 and 909 days, though the duration of this new mission is undisclosed. This flight will test advanced technologies, including high-bandwidth laser communications with commercial satellite networks in low Earth orbit, offering faster and more secure data transfer than radio frequencies. It will also demonstrate a quantum inertial sensor, enabling spacecraft navigation in GPS-denied or deep space environments. Space Force leaders emphasize that these experiments are key to improving the resilience, adaptability, and operational capabilities of U.S. space systems. And finally, SpaceX has partnered with American radio astronomers to develop an automated system that reduces satellite interference with sensitive radio telescopes. The collaboration, led by the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, created the operational data sharing system and a Starlink algorithm that redirects satellite beams or mutes electronics during scheduled observations. This system, tested at the Very Large Array in New Mexico, allows telescopes to continue detecting faint cosmic signals despite thousands of satellites crossing overhead daily. Radio astronomers warn that interference from low Earth orbit constellations like Starlink could obscure signals from distant galaxies or even evidence of extraterrestrial life. With satellite numbers expected to rise above 100,000 by 2030, the need for protective measures is urgent. Researchers hope the system will be adopted worldwide and by other satellite operators, enabling astronomy and satellite internet to coexist. If successful, this approach could set a precedent for balancing technological progress with preservation of humanity's window into the universe.
This week, the FCC commissioners unanimously voted to open a rulemaking to consider a ground-up re-examination of the national alert and warning systems, including the Emergency Alert Systems, EAS, and the Wireless Emergency Alerts, or WEA. The Commission says this action will explore whether fundamental changes to these systems could make them more effective, efficient, and better able to serve the public's needs. The United States maintains national capabilities that provide the President and other government authorities with the ability to send emergency alerts to the public. These capabilities include EAS, which provides emergency alerts to the public via radio, television, satellite, and cable systems, and WEA, which provides emergency alerts to supported mobile devices. With underlying frameworks that are 31 and 13 years old, respectively, the time is right to explore if structural changes to these systems are needed, with an eye toward making sure the FCC is leveraging the latest technology to save lives. Among the goals of the rulemaking are to seek comment on the objectives for effective alert and warning systems, explore which entities need to be able to send alerts to fully accomplish these objectives, how these needs should be addressed in the design of alerting systems, consider the alert transmission capabilities that a national public alert and warning system must have to achieve its objectives, including the need for resilience, geographic targeting, and security. Ask whether EAS and WEA are meeting the needs and expectations of both the public and alerting authorities, and if not, whether redesign or targeted changes would allow EAS and WEA to fully reach their potential, and examine both the types of information and distribution methods needed to effectively convey information to the public through both the emergency alert system and the wireless emergency alert system.
The Trump administration has asked NASA employees to draw up plans to end at least 2 major satellite missions, according to current and former NASA staffers. If the plans are carried out, one of the missions would be permanently terminated because the satellites would burn up in the atmosphere. The data the 2 missions collect is widely used, including by scientists, oil and gas companies, and farmers who need detailed information about carbon dioxide and crop health. They are the only 2 satellite missions federally funded that were designed and built specifically to monitor planet-warming greenhouse gases. It is unclear why the Trump administration seeks to end the missions. The equipment in space is state-of-the-art and is expected to function for many more years, according to scientists who worked on the missions. An official review by NASA in 2023 found that the data are of exceptionally high quality and recommended continuing the mission for at least 3 more years. Both missions, known as the Orbiting Carbon Observatories, measure carbon dioxide and plant growth around the globe. They use identical measurement devices, but one device is attached to a standalone satellite, which the other is attached to the International Space Station. The standalone satellite would burn up in the atmosphere if NASA pursued plans to terminate the mission. Presidential budget proposals are wish lists that often bear little resemblance to final congressional budgets. The Orbit Carbon Observatory missions have already received funding from Congress through at least the end of the 2025 fiscal year, which ends September 30th. Draft budgets that Congress is currently considering for next year keep NASA funding basically flat. But it's not clear whether these specific missions will receive funding again, or if Congress will pass a budget before current funding expires on September 30th. Last week, NASA announced it will consider proposals from private companies and universities that are willing to take on the cost of maintaining the device that is attached to the International Space Station, as well as other device that measures ozone in the atmosphere. The missions are called Orbiting Carbon Observatories because they were originally designed to measure carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But soon after they launched, scientists realized that they were also accidentally measuring plant growth on Earth. Basically, when plants are growing, photosynthesis is happening in their cells, and that photosynthesis gives off a very specific wavelength of light. The Orbiting Carbon Observatory's instruments in space measure that light all over the planet. NASA and others have turned this happy accident into an incredibly valuable set of maps of plant photosynthesis around the world, explains Scott Denny, a longtime climate scientist at Colorado State University who worked on the OCO missions and is now retired. Lo and behold, we also get these lovely high-resolution maps of plant growth, he says, and that's useful to farmers, useful to ranch land, and grazing and drought monitoring, and forest mapping, and all kinds of things in addition to CO2 measurements. The cost of maintaining the 2 orbiting carbon observatory satellite missions up in space is a small fraction of the amount of money taxpayers already spent to design and launch the instruments. The 2 missions cost about $750 million to design, build, and launch, according to David Crisp, a retired NASA scientist. By comparison, maintaining both orbiting carbon observatory missions in orbit cost about $15 million per year, Chris says. The money covers the cost of downloading the data, maintaining a network of calibration sensors on the ground, and making sure the standalone satellite isn't hit by space debris, according to Crisp. Recent media reports about the directive have said no reason has been given for the terminations, which would destroy one of the satellites and its sensitive instruments because the spacecraft would burn up on re-entry to Earth's atmosphere. The other satellite is attached to the International Space Station. Crisp goes on to say, just from an economic standpoint, it makes no economic sense to terminate NASA missions that are returning incredibly valuable data.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Welcome to the 41st segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio, Ham's organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our thanks go out to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website in the preparation of these segments. Now, sit back, relax, and follow along with us as we present this next chapter of Ham Radio History. First Band, Top Band. This is part 2 of this segment. On 28 June, the Commerce Department signed approval of the new regulations, designated General Letter Number 252. General and restricted amateur radio station licenses would permit the use of pure CW anywhere between 150 and 200 meters, with spark, modulated CW, and unfiltered CW being restricted to wavelengths of 176 to 200 meters, basically adopting the League's suggestion. Special amateur radio licenses could extend the use of pure CW to 220 meters. Pure CW was defined as oscillations produced using a power supply of substantially direct current, such as a battery, generator, or rectified filtered AC with less than 5% supply modulation, the term used to describe any remaining non-DC component. Input power for all 3 classes was limited to 1,000 watts. Each station license would specify the equipment in use and the restrictions that applied to a specific transmitter. More than one was possible. Special stations had to be operated by amateurs holding an extra first-grade amateur operator's license, a newly established class, or a first-class or extra first-class commercial license. The new extra first-grade amateur license required passing with a 75% grade, an examination containing a new set of questions, sending and receiving code at 20 words per minute, and 2 years of experience as an amateur operator, as the League had recommended. This license was the first antecedent to the later extra-class license. General and restricted licenses were again being recalled for modification, this time to specify wavelength and quiet hours, whereas special licenses were being replaced with newly issued ones to reflect the new allocation. All licenses would specify that transmitting was not permitted between 8 and 10:30 p.m. local time, nor Sunday mornings during local church services. On one hand, this was recognition of the effectiveness of the voluntary quiet hours in the Rochester Plan, and on the other, observation that it was not being uniformly observed. The later 8 p.m. start time was a welcome change. For the first time, amateurs officially had a band assigned to them rather than a single specified wavelength, 200 meters. Although the League did not get the desired access to wavelengths shorter than 150 meters, the Commerce Department assured amateurs that it would grant special licenses to operate there for all applicants who were seriously interested in experimenting. Having a band of wavelengths opened up new possibilities for reducing QRM. Warner optimistically, if unrealistically, suggested that we have so many cycles in our band that if we distribute ourselves even approximately evenly, we should have almost no QRM. But to take advantage of the space, amateurs needed a technique to make it easier to change wavelength, normally a cumbersome procedure. This is something we have never developed because it hasn't been permitted us before, he noted. A frustrating yet common occurrence was that you would hear a station you'd like to work calling on a different wavelength from your transmitter, then fail to raise him because he was not tuning around with his receiver. The League secretary marveled at how funny it is to call blindly and hope our correspondent will be kind enough to turn his knobs on our wave, how much more to the point to call on the wave we know he's listening on. He cited an example where two stations miss each other, one on 200 meters and the other on 215, a difference of about 105 kilohertz, and he called for invention by the members, writing that, "We don't believe there is a circuit whereby it can be done efficiently with even two controls. The couplings have to be changed, and it is likely to become a half-hour job just to QSY." The second big job was to devise transmitters that produce no spurious emissions, or at least fewer of them. The Commerce Department indicated that it might consider lifting the quiet hours requirement if amateurs could build a transmitter which is silent on the waves it isn't supposed to be using, even when listened to next door. This was an implied reference to interference to broadcast listeners who would likely be using unselective receivers. A broadcaster on 222 meters, for example, is only 150 kilohertz away from 200 meters. This clearly called for the use of pure CW with no modulation effects of any kind. When all these things are solved, predicted Warner, a bug-proof amateur radio transmitter will be the result. We shall be much happier. Our work will be much more pleasant and more enjoyable. Ahead of the ARRL Board's upcoming detailed consideration of the new rules, Warner summed up his impressions and suspicions this way. From the standpoint of the broadcasters, it's fine business, but not from that of the amateur. It seems somebody else has their eye on the waves below 150 meters, and we did not succeed in our effort to secure an amateur band around 100 meters. The majority sentiment on the conference was to fix up the broadcasting business so it could succeed, and tribute was exacted from the government services, the amateur, the commercial, and even perhaps the facilities safeguarding life at sea to make that possible. Around this time, amateurs began to discuss how band allocations were specified and talked about. Echoing an increasingly popular opinion, QST correspondent A.N. Goldsmith asked how and why wavelength was chosen over frequency to describe radio waves when frequency was much more natural in his estimation. After all, nobody referred to AC power as 5 million meter waves. The practice of specifying wavelength probably dated back to Hertz, ironically enough, since his name would later be used internationally as the standard unit of frequency, who was experimenting with waves of only a few meters, and to studies of light waves which had frequencies so high as to be practically impossible to comprehend, wrote Goldsmith. But for radio it seems a big mistake to think in terms of wavelength. It was much easier to speak about space for transmission in terms of frequency, since that amount of space depended directly on the frequency of the modulating signal. Thus, the frequency at the center of a signal's band of occupied frequencies is the carrier frequency. It then becomes easy to say, for example, a 200-meter CW signal at a speed of 20 words per minute is on a carrier frequency of 1,500 kilocycles and occupies a band 10 cycles wide. Similarly, a phone signal occupies a band having a width that is double the maximum desired audio frequency, which, Goldsmith asserted, ranges from roughly 4,400 cycles for speech to 15,000 for high-grade music. The band of wavelengths depends on the wavelength itself, whereas the band of frequencies is the same for a given mode of transmission, regardless of the carrier frequency. Using frequency made it much easier to talk about signal occupancy within bands. This discussion made clear why spark was on its way out. A spark signal extends out indefinitely from its carrier, getting weaker as you move further from the center. A well-behaved modern station must have a definite address. It must occupy a certain numbered residence of reasonable width on the street of carrier frequencies, and it may not invade everyone else's home to some extent. And that is exactly what the spark station unfortunately does, and why it must be eliminated, wrote Goldsmith. Having used wavelength for so long, it would be difficult to make the change due to conventional and sentimental objection to it, he added. But converting it was easy, really. Dividing 300 by the wavelength in meters gives the frequency in megahertz. To get the frequency at 200 meters, you divide 300 by 200, which equals 1.5 megahertz. With the arrival of a band and allocations within it, amateurs would have to change both how they produced signals and how they talked about them. Included in this material are quotes from the following. Kenneth B. Warner, Some Jobs to Do, editorial, QST, August 1923, page 37. A. N. Goldsmith, Why Kilocycle, QST, June 1923, page 32. With great appreciation to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, in the preparation of this segment. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. The Japan Amateur Satellite Association, or JAMSAT, announced the launch of the Blueberry Jam project. The goal of the project is to build an open-source multi-mode transponder for CubeSats. They are targeting mid-2026 as the completion date for the project. AMSAT VP of Engineering Jerry N0JY commented, AMSAT North America is excited to see the Japan Amateur Satellite Association's commitment to open source development and collaboration with amateur satellite organizations around the world with their Blueberry Jam initiative. Jerry further said that AMSAT is happy to share their schematics for their open source LTM-2 linear transponder module that is flown on 2 satellites. MESAT-1 or MO-122 is one of them that is still functioning. The LTM will fly on Gulf T as well as the Fox Plus satellites. Jerry also said AMSAT is very happy to share their work on the upcoming SDR Gen 2, a software-defined radio that will provide all-mode functionality and continuous coverage from 144 MHz through 6 GHz, providing 5 and dime. JAMSAT's project will certainly benefit the ham community. More amateur satellites can be built and launched, expanding the number of amateur satellites in use. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's look at the current solar weather and propagation forecast report. Solar activity was at low levels on August 18th, 20th, and 21st, with only C-class flares observed. Activity increased to moderate levels on August 19th following an M1.1 flare at 0439 UTC, from an area beyond the eastern limb. Moderate levels were also observed on August 22nd as Region 4191 produced a long-duration M1.7 flare. Associated with this flare was a Type 2 radio sweep, with an estimated shock speed of 521 km per second. The associated coronal mass ejection was deemed to be behind the Sun-Earth line. Moderate levels continued into August 23rd and 24th, with an M1.9 and an M1.3 flare, both originating from beyond the northeast limb. While multiple coronal mass ejections were observed in coronagraph imagery over the period, nearly all were at or beyond the eastern limb and none were considered to have an Earth-directed component. Geomagnetic field activity was at quiet to unsettled levels on August 18th and 24th, bookending a negative polarity coronal hole high-speed stream. Unsettled to active conditions were observed on August 20th through the 23rd as coronal hole high-speed stream activity elevated, with active to minor storm levels observed on August 19th. Solar activity is expected to be at low levels, with varying chances for M-class flares which are minor to moderate events, from now, all the way through September 20th. Geomagnetic field activity is expected to be at mostly quiet levels on August 29th through September 3rd, and again on September 11th through the 14th. Unsettled levels are likely on September 7th through the 10th, and again on September 17th through the 20th. Active conditions are likely on September 4th through the 9th and September 15th and 16th, with possible minor storming on September 4th through the 6th, and again on September 15th. All increased activity levels are associated with coronal hole high-speed stream influences. Given the significant decline in solar activity this spring, it is expected to increase by the end of summer at the earliest, and more likely by the beginning of fall. This expectation is now beginning to be fulfilled. And if the rise in solar activity continues, we can guess whether solar activity will continue to grow until the possible second maximum of the 25th solar cycle, possibly this fall. A few days ago, sunspot groups began to appear in the eastern part of the solar disk, which we knew about thanks to helioseismological observations. And not only thanks to them, coronal plasma ejections extending beyond the eastern limb of the solar disk were also observable, and in recent days, an increase in the concentration of protons in the solar wind has also affected the Earth. The conditions for shortwave propagation have improved significantly due to increased solar radiation, and have fluctuated significantly and rapidly, especially during the occurrence of sporadic E-layers. Active regions on the Sun will pass through the central meridian in a few days. Their activity will therefore begin to have a much greater impact on the Earth's magnetosphere and ionosphere. More than a few surprises are expected. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Karl Lewetzelschwab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the vocap online for ham radio website.
Just ahead in radio sport this week, August 29th through the 31st, the SCRY RTTY Ops WW RIDI contest, that's digital. August 30th through the 31st, the U.S. Islands QSO Party, CW Phone and digital. August 30th through the 31st as well, the Worldwide Digi DX contest, digital. August 30th through the 31st, the Colorado QSO Party, CW Phone and digital. And August 30th through the 31st, the Kansas QSO Party, that's CW Phone and digital. And on September 1st to the 2nd, the MIQRP Labor Day CW Sprint, that is CW. And remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions, August 30th through September 1st, it's the Shelby Hamfest, hosting the ARRL North Carolina Section Convention. That's in Shelby, North Carolina. September 7th, the Southern New Jersey Conference and Hamfest, hosting the ARRL Southern New Jersey Section Convention in Mullica Hill, New Jersey. September 12th through the 13th, the Slidell EOC Hamfest, hosting the ARRL Louisiana State Convention in Slidell, Louisiana. And September 19th through the 21st, it's the Duke City Hamfest, hosting the ARRL New Mexico State Convention. That's in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And remember to search the ARRL Hamfest calendar and convention database to find events in your area.
Authorities in India have announced a crackdown on the listing and sale of handheld transceivers from China that they say break laws governing consumer protection and the unauthorized use of radio frequencies. Stories in various Indian media outlets identify some of the 13 e-commerce sellers in question as Facebook, Amazon, Flipkart, and IndiaMart, among others. The nation's Consumer Affairs Commissioner, Prahlad Joshi, said that the violations of the India Telegraph Act, the Wireless Telegraph Act, and rules governing the use of low and very low power shortwave RF devices were being broken. Acting as an advocate for radio users, the West Bengal Radio Club secretary, Ambarish Nag Biswas, VU2JFA, told the Statesman website that users of these radio sets could interfere with police and other agencies' communications and gather sensitive information related to national security.
Swiss weather intelligence company Meteomatics has unveiled the Meteoglider, a reusable glider platform designed to improve the way atmospheric data is gathered. Introduced in the spring of 2025, the Meteoglider advances the familiar Radiosonde concept with a sustainable GPS-guided recovery capability that promises significant operational and environmental benefits. Radiosondes carried aloft by weather balloons have long provided vital measurements of temperature, humidity, pressure, and wind conditions. These instruments supply essential input for forecasts, climate models, and atmospheric studies. However, conventional radiosondes are almost always lost after deployment. Out of approximately 600,000 units launched worldwide each year, an estimated 80% are never recovered, leaving most as non-reusable debris. The Meteoglider overcomes this challenge by gliding back under control after its flight. Constructed of lightweight foam and weighing only 250 grams, the vehicle ascends to heights of about 110,000 feet before release. Guided by GPS, the Meteoglider can return to its launch point or a designated location, typically completing the descent in around 25 minutes while reaching speeds of nearly 460 feet per second. Performance remains on par with traditional systems. Meteogliders collect the same high-quality meteorological data as radiosondes, but with the added benefit of multiple reuses. Each unit can be recovered and redeployed as many as 50 times, extending the service life of its lithium batteries and electronics. This significantly reduces the recurring expense of atmospheric soundings while also addressing sustainability goals. Another advantage is the practicality of operation. Meteogliders do not require special flight permissions and can be deployed as readily as conventional balloon-borne instruments. Their recoverability reduces waste, lowers operating costs, and minimizes the environmental footprint associated with routine meteorological monitoring. The technology originated with Swiss startup R2 Home, which Meteomatics acquired in late 2024 following a $22 million funding round. Together with the company's established Meteodrone system, Meteogliders represent a new chapter in scalable, sustainable atmospheric sensing. By combining innovation with proven methods, Meteomatics aims to reshape global weather intelligence practices with tools that are both economical and environmentally responsible.
More after a break on This Week in Amateur Radio.
SpaceX is preparing for the 10th integrated test flight of its Starship Super Heavy launch system from Starbase, Texas. This mission follows the completion of investigation into the loss of Starship on Flight 9 and the Ship 36 static fire anomaly. SpaceX reports that both hardware and operational changes have been implemented to improve reliability, with technical summaries of the investigations available online. The booster's landing burn experiments are a primary focus of Flight 10. SpaceX plans to intentionally disable one of the three center engines during the landing sequence, relying on a backup engine from the middle ring to complete the burn. The booster will then transition to a two-engine hover maneuver above the ocean's surface before shutdown and splashdown, providing data on redundancy and landing performance. The Starship upper stage will attempt to several in-flight demonstrations, including the deployment of 8 Starlink mass simulators, a Raptor engine relight, and multiple re-entry experiments. To stress test the thermal protection system, a significant number of heat shield tiles have been removed, while metallic tile alternatives and active cooling systems will be evaluated. These measures are intended to expose vulnerabilities and refine re-entry survivability. Additional objectives include testing functional catch fittings and assessing rear flap performance during maximum entry dynamic pressure. According to SpaceX, these experiments are vital steps in the development of a rapidly reusable launch system. With manufacturing ramping up at Star Factory in Texas and new launch infrastructure under construction in both Texas and Florida, Starship continues to progress towards operational readiness for future missions.
Amateur radio operators and shortwave listeners are invited to participate in a unique event on August 30th, 2025. The Maritime Radio Historical Society's annual Cryptographic Challenge will begin at 2000 UTC. Using the facilities of Coast Station KPH San Francisco Radio, an encrypted message using the famous Enigma machine will be transmitted in 5-letter groups in Morse and RTTY on 6 different commercial frequencies. Listeners are invited to receive and decrypt the messages. Certificates are awarded for successful decodes. Last year there were 162 participants from 12 countries. More information, including frequencies, can be found on the Maritime Radio Historical Society's website at radiomarine.org. The Maritime Radio Historical Society was formed on July 12, 1999, the date of the last commercial Morse transmission in the United States.
To celebrate the 2025 Handy Ham Radio Camp, along with the Handy Ham program's 58th anniversary, the Handy Ham Radio Club and the Handy Ham Radio Club of Minnesota are sponsoring a QSO party during Radio Camp. The objective is for Handy Ham campers to work as many stations as possible during the 48-hour operating period. The QSO party will be on the air September 5th through the 7th, 2100 UTC to 2100 UTC, using call sign Alpha Bravo 8 Whiskey Foxtrot on 14.250, 7.200, 28.350, and 14.050 MHz. Suggested HF operating frequencies 28.050 CW and 28.350 SSB, 21.050 CW and 21.350 SSB, 14.050 CW, 14.250 SSB, 7.050 CW, and 7.200 SSB. There will be activity on all amateur bands and modes to make contacts, including digital and voice over Internet protocol modes. The exchange is simply name and state, province, or country. Stations will be using their own call signs in addition to the club call signs. Please listen for stations calling CQ Radio Camp. For more information about the Handy Ham program, contact handyham.org.
Continuing the FCC's strong enforcement efforts to protect essential radio transmissions in the U.S., they have ordered the owners of a spa in Florida to immediately cease operation of a device that was interfering with AT&T FirstNet cellular network. Agents from the Miami office of the FCC responded to the interference using direction-finding techniques. Their investigation identified a Bluetooth speaker located at Asian Touch Spa that was the source of the interference. When requested by agents, employees at the spa turned off the speaker determined to be the source. The agents were later able to confirm that the interference to AT&T FirstNet cellular network had ceased as a result.
A plane piloted by Bill Hartzell, N3WSH, will be using the call sign W6Y as the first-time aeronautical rover for this year's Route 66 on the Air special event. When hams get on the air on September 6th, he'll be on the air operating as this year's first-time bonus station through September 9th. Bill, a retired U.S. Air Force pilot from Oklahoma, will be flying about 7,000 feet high above the traffic on the nation's Mother Road, making the trip from Chicago to Santa Monica and making QSOs with licensed hams on the ground who are near his route, which he will travel both eastbound and westbound during the event. He will be calling QRZ on 146.490 MHz simplex. If you get him, it's a bonus. Either way, you can still get a clean sweep chasing the other stations. The 26th annual special event, organized by the Citrus Belt Amateur Radio Club, will remain active for a few more days after Bill's activations, coming in for a landing itself on the 14th.
With the retirement of NOAA 15, NOAA 18, and NOAA 19 satellites, the long-running Polar Orbiting Operational Environmental Satellite Series has officially ended service. Some in the community worry this marks the end of easily accessible weather imagery, but the outlook for amateur reception remains bright. Russia's Meteor M satellites are now the mainstay for 137 MHz reception. Their LRPT signals are strong and reliable, and with additional Meteor M launches planned, service is expected to continue well into the 2040s. Higher resolution imagery is also available on the 1.7 GHz band for those with modest upgrades in equipment. Europe's METOP series continues to transmit on L-band with METOP B and C expected to operate until 2027 and 2030. The newly launched METOP SG satellite will extend coverage for another decade, ensuring continuity for hobbyists. In addition, the Arctic Weather Satellite and its planned successor in the Sternus series will provide valuable radiometric data for weather monitoring. Geostationary satellites also provide opportunities. Russia's Electro-L constellation broadcasts HRIT-LRIT on 1691 MHz with a new spacecraft scheduled for launch this October. For those in the Americas, the GOES series will remain active through the 2030s, continuing HRIT and GRB service. The U.S. Space Force's EWS-G program further adds to the options, retasking former GOES satellites for continued imagery. China's Fengyun 3 satellite and Korea's GK2A also contribute, while future developments in X-band reception are lowering the barrier for amateurs interested in higher resolution Earth observations. Advances in software such as SatDump are making it easier than ever to decode and process these signals on affordable hardware. The decommissioning of the Polar Orbiting Operational Environmental Satellite Fleet marks the end of an era, but not the end of the hobby. With a diverse mix of active and planned satellites across multiple bands, amateur weather satellite reception will remain an active part of the hobby, supported by a mix of current satellites and future missions. For those interested in exploring these opportunities, the open-source SatDump software can be used to decode imagery from many of the satellites mentioned above. SatDump is available for download at satdump.org.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
Betelgeuse, the massive red supergiant star located about 650 light-years from Earth, is showing exciting signs it might soon explode into a brilliant supernova. When this happens, it will be one of the brightest events ever seen in the night sky, possibly shining so brightly it could even be visible during the day. This means for weeks or even months, people on Earth could see what looks like a second sun lighting up the sky. The explosion of Betelgeuse will produce light so intense it might rival the brightness of a full moon. This rare cosmic event is the front-row chance for humanity to witness a supernova close enough to see with the naked eye. Although this powerful explosion will be dazzling, it poses no danger to Earth. Instead, it marks an extraordinary moment in space history, the first time humans will get to watch a nearby star's dramatic death close up. The supernova will be millions of years in the making, but the signs now tell astronomers that Betelgeuse is preparing for the final act. Once the star bursts, the sky will transform in a way that only the universe can create, a breathtaking spectacle combining science, wonder, and cosmic beauty. High on Orion's shoulder, the colossal red supergiant is roughly 650 light-years away, nearing the dramatic end of its stellar life. This isn't just any star. Betelgeuse is 10 to 20 times more massive than the Sun, burning through its fuel at a furious pace. In recent years, especially during its mysterious dimming in 2019 and 2020, the star has shown unusual behavior, leaving astronomers to wonder, is it a long-anticipated supernova about to erupt? If so, the spectacle will be breathtaking. For weeks or months, a single point of light would blaze brighter than the full moon, shining clearly even in daylight. The explosion would hurl vast amounts of energy and elements into space, seeding the galaxy with the raw materials for future stars and planets. I wonder what it will do for amateur radio. So keep your eyes on the night sky. The universe is ready to put on one of the most unforgettable shows ever, reminding us of how incredible and alive the cosmos really is.
The SETI Institute's Allen Telescope Array, or ATA, recently played host to 16 scientists, engineers, and technologists who gathered for a 3-day hackathon to develop novel capabilities for the observatory. Sponsored by the Amateur Radio Digital Charitable Foundation, in collaboration with the SETI Institute, the Breakthrough Listen Initiative, and GNU Radio, the hackathon drew participants from across the United States and around the world who were interested in using the ATA for SETI and radio astronomy observations of Earth-orbiting satellites and education, among other topics. The ATA is a 42-antenna array of 6-meter diameter dishes dedicated to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. With recently upgraded receivers capable of increased sensitivity and digital signal processing hardware capable of tuning to more frequency channels at once, the ATA is not only a powerful tool in its own right, but also enables low-level access to data from the antennas, as well as flexible configuration so that users can take control of the entire array at once or individual antennas to carry out different projects simultaneously. The GNU Radio open-source software environment powers one available back-end instrument. A GNU Radio-focused hackathon held at the ATA in 2019 led to the formal joining of GNU Radio with the SETI Institute in 2020. Many radio telescopes, and indeed radio devices more generally, are built with custom hardware to process incoming signals, said Derek Kozel, principal investigator for GNU Radio and the SETI Institute. GNU Radio is changing the paradigm by replacing hardware with easily configurable software, providing scientists and engineers with remarkable flexibility in how they utilize the telescope. And the fact that the software is open source means that anyone can help contribute. Few observatories offer the opportunity for hands-on experimentation, development, and testing that is possible with the ATA, said SETI Institute adjunct senior scientist Steve Croft, who organized the hackathon along with the observatory staff. Hackathon attendees worked on topics as diverse as precise positioning of satellites in geosynchronous orbits, classifying signals and data streaming from the telescope, and making real-time detections of pulsars. We're excited to be able to make the ATA available to the community and to have them contribute to capabilities that will benefit all users of the telescope, said Andrew Simone, Bernard M. Oliver Chair for SETI and the SETI Institute. By working together with partners from academia and industry, we're pushing forward the frontiers of radio astronomy technology and also demonstrating that SETI is an effort where folks with a wide range of backgrounds and skills can help us to achieve our goals. The SETI Institute is a nonprofit, multidisciplinary research and education organization whose mission is to lead humanity's quest to understand the origins and prevalence of life and intelligence in the universe and to share that knowledge with the world. Our research encompasses the physical and biological sciences and leverages expertise in data analytics, machine learning, and advanced signal detection technologies. The SETI Institute is a distinguished research partner for industry, academia, and government agencies, including NASA and NSF.
In Sonoma County, California, floods, wildfires, and earthquakes are among the best reasons for becoming a radio operator. With that in mind, the county's Department of Emergency Management has entered the second year of a 3-year program that includes helping more Sonoma Springs area residents to get licensed and get on the air. The initiative has been funded through a $70,000 federal grant. Emergency management officials are now preparing for training sessions in October that will prepare area residents for an exam leading toward a license to use handheld radios, especially at times when cellular telephone networks fail. The radios are part of General Mobile Radio Services, or GMRS, a licensed service operating between 462 and 467 MHz. The county is coordinating with amateur radio operators in the North Bay Communications Cooperative and its auxiliary communications system. The goal is to coordinate frequencies so that GMRS users can work seamlessly within the broader emergency communications system. The focus is on residents in the community of Sonoma Springs, which is classified as an evacuation zone when there are wildfires, but participants who live outside the area are also welcome to enroll. The county's program can supply as many as 175 radios to participants who successfully complete the program. The grant also covers fees for the license exam. Emergency Management Specialist Nancy Brown told the Sonoma News that radio is seen as the ultimate and most resilient backup plan. She said no matter what happens, you have something that will work.
A team is planning the Andaman Island de-expedition in 2026, and they have an ambitious agenda. The goal is to log at least 100,000 QSOs while the team is on the air from the Indian archipelago in the Bay of Bengal. Contacts from around the world are expected to keep the on-site crew of 18 busy, but organizers plan to add to the team by bringing in remote operators, especially young licensed amateurs. The remote team lead, Jerry, W1VE, is a veteran of remote operations for the VP6A, E510, and other de-expeditions, and is hoping to replicate these successes with the Andaman Island de-expedition. Hams who participate in the remote operation will be required to have an Indian visa and an amateur radio license from India, even though they won't even physically be there. Operators are to be selected by April 1 of 2026. Promises to be a busy time once the activation gets underway on October 19th of 2026. The operators expect to participate in the 2026 CQ Worldwide SSB contest representing India. They will also be activating 3 parks on the air sites between the 27th and the 29th of October. The entity is also IOTA AS-001. Jerry asks that interested amateurs contact him directly via email at jerry@remote.radio. That's Gerry, spelled Gerry, at remote.radio.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
And finally this week, years before the first transatlantic phone call and decades before international direct dialing would become available, a Cedar Rapids, Iowa teenager, Master Collins, had a direct line to one of the most remote places on Earth. And decades before companies like Collins Radio and Rockwell Collins became multi-billion-dollar enterprises, this 15-year-old's ham radio was connecting Arctic explorers with the world from his parents' attic. For weeks, his rudimentary technology would be their lifeline to the Chief of Naval Operations at National Geographic and the world. It wasn't the first time he had communicated with the world. By then, he had talked wirelessly to people in Australia, Belgium, England, Guam, India, Mexico, Puerto Rico, and Scotland. I don't think they realized they were talking to a 15-year-old, it was said. As the Great Depression set in, Collins found success selling radio transmitters to international ham operators from his attic. Enter Collins Radio. In his own lifetime, Collins and his innovations have had a hand in reaching faraway places. The Arctic, critical communications during World War II, the televised moon landing, and more.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon. This Week in Amateur Radio is heard around the country and around the world on great repeater systems like the CQ0 UTRZ repeater on 439.175 MHz in Sierra Aristal in Portugal, covering Porto to Lira. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.